All right, welcome everybody to another TLC conversation. This one's a little bit different. Instead of having a panel coming to talk about a particular topic, we decided that since we had a pretty awesome experience at CXL Live in Austin, and there were a lot of key takeaways and insights and things that we wanted to share and talk about as a group after the conference, I invited several of those folks and asked them to come and share with everybody for those of you who couldn't attend so that we don't have too much FOMO going on. We can sort of share some of our favorite conversations, the actual presentations, key insights, anything. You guys get the opportunity to ask us questions for those of us who attended. Those of us who attended have questions that we want to ask some of each other for conversations we didn't get to finish. And we'll just chat about that. And then one of the things I want to make sure everybody's paying attention for, listening for, if you hear a topic or an insight or an idea that was discussed during CXL that you want to dive deeper on, that you would think would make a good TLC conversation, make sure we know. Either put it in the TLC Slack or in the Zoom, or just take yourself off mute and let us know. Any questions, anyone? Ready to go? All right, let's do this. Remember, I muted everybody. So if you're gonna say something or do something, you have to take yourself off mute. And I'm just going to call on folks to get us started. Hopefully I won't have to do this going forward, but I am going to call on folks. So one of the things that would be helpful for me is in the participant list. If you would look for the participant list, scroll your mouse around, you'll find where the managed participants are, or look at the participants. Right click on where your name is or hover over, and where it says more, rename yourself using your name. So for example, Bamarless is Bree. She already did it. She's so fast. She renamed herself Bree. So for those of you who do not have your actual name in there, Chad, like I can change yours to Chad so that you're not Chan. That would be helpful. Awesome. Okay, so let me just get started. Can I call on you, Bree? Would you like to start us off with all of your wonderful energy? Oh no, your audio's bad. What is that? There's a buzz. Try again. We can't hear you at all. Okay, I'll go to somebody else. You mute. You got it? Mel, do you want to start us off? You're on mute too.
I am unmuted now.
There you go.
My key takeaways, my biggest and most favorite was Lizzie saying that there was no such thing as being close to statistically significant, because that's something we run into all the time. We have, we've encountered folks or worked with folks who want to rate how close they are to statistical significance to help kind of bolster a story. And so that was like super helpful, and something that I intend to share far and wide, in a way. She made it understandable, and I think that was really the key element there, is picking up on her way of explaining it, so that I can hopefully share that out further.
So Lizzie's talk was on various different, was that the one that was about the hidden ghosts?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So does anybody else remember anything from Lizzie's talk that you found super helpful?
Lizzie's talk was also one of my key takeaways, because I am coming from a marketing, learning, and development perspective. And one of the key insights for me was how marketers really need to kind of step up and take responsibility for having proficiency with some key statistics, concepts, and knowledge and language to be able to do our jobs well. And so that was one of the big takeaways for me as well.
Yeah, I think there's a common misconception around A/B testing. I can't remember, Chad, if you're the one who started or had the talk about the fact that when a lot of folks started testing did not come from an analysis perspective. They didn't come into testing from that world. Maybe they came from the design world or UX or some other non-analytical space where they didn't have a full grasp of statistics, because the tools enabled them to use a WYSIWYG editor, drag and drop, run a test, and then the test told you what action you should take, or what told you that you had reached significance with no real understanding of what that meant. And so there were at least three, maybe four, were there 3 or 4 data scientists conversations at CXL? 3. Valerie says 3. I'm going to trust her. Chad was one of them. And, you know, I thought it was really important because a lot of folks that are doing testing today, again, that's a gap. And so we have to your point, Bree, we have to re-educate ourselves so that we can use the right language, so that we're not equating, you know, a p-value with, you know, confidence probability. We're not saying that we're confident in results when actually that's not the actual definition of what confidence is. It's, you know, it's the inverse of something. And so better understanding that and being able to describe it in a way that our business partners get it, I think is super important. Anybody else got anything from Bree? I'm sorry, you're Bree. Anybody got anything from Lizzie's talk? Bree's like, what did they get from me? Right. How about, so my big takeaway, or I had a whole lot, but the thing that I was able to immediately take action on, and and by the way, Chad, I have a slide that I needed to edit of yours. I know. So Chad's talk specifically was talking about the difference between product validation testing versus marketing optimization testing, and that these two teams are both testing at the same time, sometimes in total isolation, and that there is interaction effects that aren't being measured. And there's also this like push and pull for resources and prioritization. And so he kind of explained the difference of those types of testing and, you know, the pros, cons, risks, you know, you get more, you reduce your risk more with this one, you learn more with that one. And for me, my key takeaway was it didn't have to be either or. It should probably be some blend. Is that what I should have taken from the talk, Chad?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was hoping people would take away from it. I think that there's and this is not just a problem I've seen at sort of smaller organizations, but even at big organizations like Microsoft, is that there can be a tendency to lean too far in the direction of one or the other, depending on how many engineers you have at your org or how many marketers you have at your org. And the big idea I was trying to communicate was, if you go too far in either direction, then you're missing out on something as an opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody else got anything from Chad's talk?
So I would say one of the things that I love in conferences, and some of the key takeaways for me, are always when folks state the obvious from the stage, but in a way that maybe people haven't thought about it before. And one of the things Chad said that stuck with me, and I think is going to influence sort of how I approach the kind of the organization of optimization, is that the product is the core of the business, and that the closer you are to product, the
more pull you have.
More pull you have.
Yeah.
That was something I wrote down and highlighted, because I mean, I know it's true, and I think we probably all kind of know it's true, but having it stated and really capturing it so succinctly, I think it's pretty key to success in building out an optimization framework within any org.
For sure. Hi, Dylan. Welcome. We missed you at CXL. I'm not going to talk. We're here to discuss, guys. Come on, Selena, I see you there. Tamara, I see you're on. Who else is there that was there? What were some of the things that you guys got out of the conference, or some of the big talks, takeaways, interesting tidbits?
Hey, can you guys hear me? This is Juan.
Hey, Juan.
How you doing? So I was actually able to go to the conference also. One of the things that I think was really cool, I think it was Eric Allen's talk.
Mm-hmm.
So the reframing a loss, I think that's one of the things he really played up really well. And I think a lot of times when we have losing tests, it's easy to just see it as a loss and not really do anything with it. But really highlighting what the savings are from running a test that we would have rolled out.
Everybody's willing to calculate the upside when there's a win, but nobody, is looking at the cost savings of a loss. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was something that was really, really helpful for us, I think, in our organization. So.
Yeah. There's that quote, you either win or you learn. Now, in testing, hopefully we always learn, but I really like to use that when we have a loss. Let's make sure that we at least learn so that we haven't, wasted our resources.
And I think that notion also really connected well with Lucas Vermeer's talk with Booking.com, because he was talking all about the barriers of experimentation being the expectation that you're winning all the time, and that's not how it works, and everything is testing. And I liked his push of taking the biggest small step to test the riskiest assumptions as quickly as possible. And that I just really held on to, because that's how you move the needle, which creates a lot of energy around experimentation in a company.
Yeah. So who was it? Was it Lucas who talked about the cost, like that there is actually a cost to testing, not the cost of losing or winning or any of that, but there's an investment.
I think the quote was A/B testing. A/B tests are our cost of tuition. It costs money to learn. Was that
there
quote?
we go.
It was awesome.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Mel got the quote in there. A loss ain't a loss. It's a lesson. Appreciate the pain. It's a blessing. That was, I think I screenshot. I took a picture of that and tweeted it.
Get the credit where credit is due. That's Jay-Z.
A little bit Jay-Z. Yeah, fair enough. Are you sure? I can't give you that credit? Like, great quote, Mel. Christian says, when you calculate the impact of a loss, how long is your time horizon assumption, i.e. how many months do you assume the negative impact would have carried? Well, I think that's the same question we all ask all the time if we do this for a win, right? Anybody solved it? Anybody have a thing an approach they want to share? Hi, Carrie. Nobody's solved it. Okay. Anybody have an approach they want to share?
I don't know if I've solved it, but the same thing that I would do for a win is what I would do for a loss. So whatever the decay rate is, or however I've amplified that over the year's impact or multiply it by number of campaigns, I would do the same for the loss so that you can put it on the same table to show the wins versus losses that way.
Christian's making a really good point. He's assuming that decay rate is different for a loss because the assumption is you would have rolled out a loser, but you would have seen the decay or the reduction and you would have turned it off and rolled it back, which I think is a fair point. Arguably, if I had my druthers, which I don't, nobody would ever approve this, but I would never calculate annualized or extended upside with any decay. I would say this is what we did during the life of the test. Because there's so much other stuff that we can't control for. That's why we do controlled experimentation, so that we can control during the life of the test. So I would say, hey, we made the company this much during the life of the test. And I wouldn't go further, but that's me and nobody ever agrees with me. So.
No, I think that's a good way of doing it.
Done. I drop. I'm out.
I mean, that's not the kind of, so this was actually a point that I was also trying to touch on a little bit, which was, when you think about things in real life, not that digital marketing or experimentation isn't real, but in your daily life, when you focus on like insurance, for example, like when you go to the dentist or something like that, like most people don't really think to themselves, oh man, this visit would have cost me this much over this many years, and over 12 months I would have saved or calculated this month, and that's the value. It's like there's kind of an implicit understood value of having something that saves you money. So
right.
If you're constantly having to justify how much value you saved, then you're kind of sort of losing the forest for the trees. Like there's a bigger issue there. I think that's something that programs need to think about a little more, instead of trying to, to sort of measure the impact of everything and then say, okay, well, this is how much revenue you've generated and this is how much the program costs, and so the ROI is this much. It's like there's more important things that you're doing than just that.
Right. And go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, it kind of goes back to Chad's analogy of insurance.
I was going to say that.
In your discusussion, that's really what we're talking about here, right? When you talk about cost saves or validating, the effectiveness, that's really, I like the analogy of insurance better than I like sort of thinking of it as a savings.
Right. So there's two parts of that. First of all, nobody ever talks about the ROI of insurance until you have a massive injury, and then you're like, oh, that was worth it, right? And obviously, if we're flipping this and we're talking about digital, that part seems real clear. Like, nobody argues the validity of validation testing. Everybody's really cool with it. But when we start talking about marketing optimization, where we're taking something and we're trying to make it better, that's where they're like, well, there's a cost associated with this and we have to pay for it. And so they're asking us to prove that we're paying for it. But if we spend as much time trying to make better tests, stronger evidence, better hypotheses, designing it in a better way, as we did trying to validate our existence and calculating the ROI of those annualized things, we're going to have much better tests. Because if you think about it, all we're trying to do is help companies make better decisions, right? That's why we test. We're trying to improve things. I mean, that's why we're here. So if you weren't testing, those decisions would be made with no data. So any data that we provide is better than none. So it's better than a coin toss. And the closer that we get to that statistical significance, whatever we're doing to control for making bad decisions, the more data we get, the better the decision. But the micro decisions that we need to make, when those either the changes are smaller, the impacts are smaller, or the traffic is lower, and in all of those cases, the only reason we end up testing for weeks and months sometimes is because we're trying to prove an ROI. If we could remove that, we could help make better decisions faster and more of them. Which was a very long-winded way to say, I wish we didn't have to do that. There's a really good conversation, by the way, over in TLC calls, if you guys aren't over there, but Corey's pointing out that, Christian's like, obviously, if you run a test and it was bad and you stopped it and you didn't roll it out, then great, you've saved the company, but you can't say that impact is as long as it would have been for a win, because arguably, had you rolled it out, we would have rolled it back, which we already talked about. But then Corey pointed out, yeah, but there's a cost to reverting back as well. So the cost of rolling it out and converting it back, the cost of running the test, all of those things. So arguably, we test so we can fail faster, right? We want to learn, we want to fail, because if we didn't fail, we didn't learn. But whose talk was pointing out that what the win rate should be, that everybody's like focusing on increasing their win rate, and actually they want to decrease their win rate. Does anybody remember that? They're talking about like the average win rate in the industry was 30%, and they think it should be really 10% for a particular company, or you're not using your testing program in the right way. You're testing things that were broken that you should really just be fixing, and your program should be pushing the envelope. Anybody remember that? I don't know if I agree with it, but it jumped out at me as very different perspective. Nobody remembers it, so it obviously wasn't that impactful to anybody else. Tom Wesleyan Wan says, I don't know. I can't remember. I just remember that number jumping out at me as like, well, that seems real low. Dylan, I see your mouth moving, but if you're talking to us, we can't hear you. He's not talking to us, which is fine. Anyone else? Was there anything you heard that jumped out at you as, not sure I agree with that, or this is controversial, or something that you think would make a good TLC topic. By the way, other than product versus marketing, because that's coming soon to a TLC call near you already. But any other topics that you guys like to cover?
So I have one actually.
Yep.
So none of my questions ever get upvoted after the end of the talks. No one ever agrees with me.
Are you asking boring questions, Chad?
I guess so. But it was actually something that Lucas said in his talk. I think Lucas gave a great presentation. But there was one thing he said that I didn't agree with, really. And it may be a case of sometimes, especially when you're working with a data science heavy field, you have to sort of get over the first hump of, I need to be able to do this correctly. And you have some advice on how to do it correctly.
Right.
And a year later, you sort of realize, I'm actually not doing this correctly, and I need to go about it another way once you get a little bit more advanced and experienced in the field.
Yep.
And one thing that he said that was like that was focusing on the hypothesis of an experiment, and that if you have the specific example was if you have two buttons and one is yellow and one is blue, and you run a test, then the only thing that differentiates them in terms of actionability, I think, was whether or not there was a hypothesis attached to it. So in the first case, I'm just running it because I think it's cool or whatever. And then the second case, I think that, the blue button is going to increase contrast, and therefore I can take some action based on that. I actually think that generally this is wrong. And it's one of the reasons that testing programs can go down a bad path is too much of an overemphasis on the concept of a hypothesis. Because just because you have a hypothesis that it was the contrast that caused this to be a winner doesn't mean it was actually.
That's not what you're testing. You're testing the null hypothesis. You're trying to disprove the null hypothesis, which does not prove the alternate hypothesis.
Exactly. And I think we have, especially when you're testing things that are a lot more complicated than just a background change,
yeah.
You don't really know the reasons that a lot of things happen. So kind of being able to keep an open mind and move in many directions is the most effective strategy. I'll give you an example that we did at Sephora. We had what was this called? It's a guest checkout option. We didn't have a guest checkout option before. We thought it would be a good idea if we added it in. And the hypothesis was that, people want to be able to check out as a guest. And if they have the capability of doing that, then they'll purchase more frequently. Now that didn't happen for a lot of reasons. And so because the hypothesis was so strong, people started asking themselves, okay, wait, so does that mean we were wrong, that people don't want to check out as a guest? Well, not necessarily. It might mean implementation was wrong. It might mean that where you tried to implement this was wrong. So it doesn't mean your hypothesis is incorrect just because your test fails and vice versa.
Right. So my 2 cents on that, if I can throw this in, I agree with what you're saying, Chad, but that's the reason that I agree with Lucas to put the emphasis on the hypothesis, because I think it was focusing on the hypothesis statement that teased out that maybe it was less about the color and more about the contrast. And then that gives you a really good place to test next, because maybe blue wasn't your best foot forward, similar to the way that you put your foot forward for guest checkout. Doesn't mean it's a bad idea, but it's still a business case and we tried this variation of it. But maybe we could try another way of tackling that problem that could work. That would be a slightly different version of that same hypothesis statement. That's why I really like the if, then, because format. So you're saying, if we do this, this will increase or decrease, whatever, because, and then that rationale statement is really important to helping do a triangulation analysis of what's really happening, like a meta-analysis, but also for next steps for iteration.
But do you feel like we're inferring some why to the data when we do that sometimes? Because
also true.
We're not getting the why from the data we're collecting typically, right? I guess that would be the one concern, is that you're inferring the reason for the effect without actually knowing whether that is true or not.
Absolutely. And I think that having that discussion is better than not taking a stance and being wrong. So as an example, when we were doing some testing in subject lines in the past, we were testing different messaging about urgency or number of days until this sign up was complete, things like that. And we had done multiple tests that included date, but it was all around the strategy of how we communicated the date. And when we looked at all of our rationale statements and we were taking a step back to figure out why we weren't winning test over test, it was actually in the fact that we presented the date. And the way that we presented the date, geolocation, it wasn't personalized. And so it was the wrong format, so it didn't resonate. But it was because we talked about how we were constructing this test and the rationale statement that we were able to see what was potentially going wrong, and it gave us a really good next step. So I completely agree, Mel, that you're not going to get it right, but I think that conversation is really important for program level testing. It's a good debate.
Is anybody familiar with Mo Kiss's, she wrote a blog post about analysis of competing hypotheses and using that framework for digital optimization? That's not familiar. I'll put a link to the blog post in the TLC calls channel. It's a really interesting idea, and I think it combines the best of both worlds, but it's focused on analytics. So to avoid analysis paralysis, to make sure that we're pulling the right data, the idea is, you have a hypothesis. Well, what would disprove your hypothesis? So instead of just taking a null and an alternate, you say, this is my directional hypothesis, which is really what we mostly start out with if we're honest with ourselves. And then you say, okay, if I could prove or disprove other things, what would disprove that hypothesis? And you create your grid and then figure out what data that you have to go pull. And again, this is all to drive analysis. But arguably, it also ensures if you can narrow it down to this one's the strongest hypothesis because I've been able to disprove this element or that element, that should lead into better hypothesis testing. And I get Chad's point completely. At some point, really the hypotheses that we're coming up with to argue about what should be on an image of a banner or what should be your button color or background color, those things we could just say, hey, I think color matters. And we could do a quick test to see if color matters. And then if it does, we could just set it to run for pure optimization. And I don't need to know why it worked. I don't need to know why blue was better for this person or that person. It just can be like, leave it and optimize it and run it. And we don't need a hypothesis to support it. But maybe the hypothesis is color matters, not the specific color, but we could test that, right? We could have like a neutral versus a brilliant or something like that. And we could test and we could provide evidence to support. I can't use the word prove. I just can't, because we know that's not what we're doing. But would that meet both needs? Hey, Lee.
Hello. But I think I like to go like Valerie's point of like, it's something that should be discussed early on. Like I get the, hey, we just say the hypothesis, we know color matter and we let it run and, get the benefit out of the better color, that strong color that calls to action. But I think what I like that Valerie is pointing out was the fact that, hey, that discussion, we need to have that discussion, right? Just because you have the hypothesis and your success metric is, let's say you're trying to increase units by like 5%. But if that doesn't happen and you see something else, what would you do differently, right? And I think a lot of times we need to train our marketers or our product management to think through that, right? It's like, if something happens differently, what would we do? Because that also is time consuming, right? To go through. And if we think of it ahead of time, or at least start, going, okay, this could possibly happen, what we do, and we can start gearing up teams to either do iterations or whatnot.
Absolutely.
And so this will be the last thing I say about this, and then I actually have something I wanted to mention on the conference that's totally related, totally unrelated, but one thing to kind of think about is oftentimes when we talk about hypothesis, we do so in a relatively broad way. Like we think that this thing that we're going to make a change is going to make things better for people. But most of especially if you have a relatively mature website or mobile app or whatever it is, you're affecting a very small percentage of people, like 1%, 2%. And so the question is, if our hypothesis was actually correct, and this was an important thing, then why is it not affecting 98 or 99% of the people who come to our website? And it might be an even greater percentage of that, because you might only be increasing a few percentage points on top of the conversions that you already have, meaning that 99% of people are the same. So you're actually affecting a very small segment of the population. And whatever that segment is seeing some benefit in what you're doing. But is that the original hypothesis? Usually not. And so I think it's good to have something that people can talk about, like everybody's kind of been saying, but don't over-index on it too much, on this idea that I was right, and therefore we should move in that direction. And that's something I've actually seen in a lot of marketing departments, is I was right about this test, and so that should inform all of our future tests based on this initial idea that I was correct.
Right.
Which and sort of leads into the presentation I think I enjoyed the most was Tammy's. So Tammy Dugan-Hurd's, who talked about relying on past research that had been done to justify all these new things you're doing in your marketing and your experimentation and your conversion and whatever, and not necessarily realizing that a lot of those quote unquote best practices were taken out of context from a research paper that is actually way more complicated than a lot of people wanted to give credit for. Like some of the social proof stuff. I think she talked about social proof. I don't remember the exact example, but I thought that was really interesting to see.
I thought it was fantastic.
Another thing that I loved about hers, sorry, I'm one of the people eating lunch, was at the end, she gave us some steps for how to look at that research. With the critical eye, how do you understand like what was the original effect, like what was the original purpose? And so she showed you what to look for in those studies to understand, is it something that's worth testing? Is it relevant to me? Or is this based on 4 people and it's not going to be helpful? Like that was like such a great closing to that talk. It was like one of my favorites too.
Wasn't that the talk also where she talked about, nope, I'm confusing it. When everybody was posting over in the Thought Leadership channel about maybe we should stop using statistical significance, and the example that was posted there about statistical significance, to me, when she was talking about the importance of going and looking at the original research and what to look for, that's part of it, is like what exactly was evaluated. Because if you're talking about, maybe the confidence interval was a little longer, but or a little wider, and therefore they didn't, reach their statistical significance, but the group of people that they selected maybe wasn't representative or was small, or the samples or times or whatever. And then we use those and we make these broad generalizations to say X works or doesn't work. That's the problem. And that's why when Chad says, sometimes maybe hypothesis testing isn't the right way to go, that's the thing that really frustrates me, is that when you're running something like a t-test, you are not testing your alternate hypothesis, which is actually what everybody thinks they're testing. You're testing only if you can disprove the null. That's all you're doing. And yet, based on the results, that's not where we go. So, and that's not what we tell everybody. And that's not, so arguably test and learn, but we're learning the wrong thing. So how do we reframe that? I thought that was frustrating because I don't know how to communicate it. I see you were able to join us, Carrie. Welcome.
I also think John Ekman's presentation on digital transformation was like most entertaining. It was like it was almost cathartic to hear him talk about how organizations have approached it historically and like what's wrong with a lot of the let's set the goals and fund the projects and go do the stuff kind of a thing. I thought that was really good, refreshing.
Yep, for sure.
I also want to call out Val's presentation as something that was, from the team that I was with, hugely helpful and beneficial, and something that people felt like they could just walk away from the conference and have like immediate applications to their actual work. So that was just incredible. And for those of you guys who were there, the conversation was all about how to present test results to inspire action. And Val's key takeaways were that you're not there to teach about optimization. And I loved the quote about we're teaching people, or explaining like how a watch is made, where they just want to know what time it is. I thought that was just so helpful to have as a quote in my head. Our goal is to inspire action, and that every touch point is an opportunity to evangelize testing. And I definitely took those away. And then you left templates, and everyone got to go take those and go and have like quick ways to think through sharing results, win or lose, and what actions come out of the test you're doing.
For sure. One of the, I think the biggest challenges that analysts have is that we look at a table of data and it makes total sense to us and we have all these insights and recommendations, and then we think we can just show that table. Look, it's statistically significant. And they're like, so? And to Val's point, we don't need to show them how the watch is made. We just need to tell them what to do based on, give them the insights and the next steps and the recommendations and get them excited about it instead of leading them to ask a bunch of questions.
And I think it was really easy for people in the audience to self-identify, like we know what our result decks look like, and it didn't look like what Valerie was showing us. So it was great.
It was fantastic.
Thanks, Bree.
Plus, we all learned about her dog's breed, which was super important. How about when learning about all the softer, and I use that in the terrible sense. I actually hate that analogy here. But, we had Will talk about SEO. We had Carrie talk about Vanguard Labs. We had Els talk about, using, asking questions, right? I thought those topics were really thought-provoking to me.
Especially when Els baited Chad. So good.
It was so, why don't we just share that just for a second so we can let everybody else enjoy that. So the best part is Els and Chad are friends. And Els asked Chad, leading up to her conversation, her talk on the stage, hey, I need somebody to volunteer to answer a question. And he's like, okay, what's the question? And she said, I need you to just answer a question about the difference between, or the better, or do you prefer quantitative over qualitative, right?
Exactly. Yeah, she told me, I'm going to say who here prefers quantitative data versus qualitative, and you're a quant guy, so raise your hand. I'm like, okay. And she said, and then once you raise your hand, I'm going to call on you, and then you're going to tell me why you prefer quant data.
So because Chad is Chad, Chad says, yes, of course I'll do that. And then he goes and prepares a response, like practices, writes out what he's going to say, and then I'll be Els. Who here prefers quant over qual? Chad's like, me? I'm like, okay, Chad, why?
Well, I was
thinking that. I'm sorry, you have to give your response only in numbers. Yes, it was perfect. It was wonderful. It was delivered well, and poor Chad was just like, oh.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Thanks, Els. We love you. But he was a good sport about it. And Valerie got to, who was it that said, yeah, what was that?
In the morning, Lucas's presentation, it was actually right after the discussion of the point that Chad brought up about having too much emphasis or not having enough emphasis on the hypothesis statement. He was saying, why do we still ask, like, which test will win, like green button or blue button? He's like, let me just tell you right now. He's like, that's stupid. Like, don't ever do that. And he got like the whole crowd up.
Hold people to ask them which test will win. That's stupid. And he went on and on and on about it. And meanwhile, Val, whose presentation was later that same day,
yep,
has slides about why you should poll people. And she's like, crap, I've got to go prepare.
Like, I've got to respond to that. So I was like, Lucas, from the safety, I was like, from the safety of the stage and the fact that I'm wearing a mic and you're not, I'm going to go ahead and disagree with you, the guy who runs the program at booking.com. But he said he agreed with my rationale, that it was for like a marketing purpose and for interaction, not
evangelism,
not to replace a hypothesis statement. I was like,
correct. So key takeaway here, ask people what they think will win or what ideas they have about something for evangelizing after you've already got your prioritized roadmap. Do not ask them, what should we test? Because that is not a valid approach to hypothesis library building. Accurate?
And you definitely only get one answer if you ask that. So be really clear what to do, and everyone would agree. Kumbaya.
Awesome. Okay, so let's take a step back for a second. What topics did you guys hear at CXL that you would like to talk about on TLC? I'll go first. I want to talk about Chad's talk. I want to talk about product validation testing versus or with marketing optimization testing. So that's topic one. What else?
So I really liked Joanna Weeb's talk. I liked Elsa's talk as well. I don't have a huge amount of experience in, like that the deep qualitative methodologies. So I mean, I would love to learn more of that.
All right, I'm typing them over here so that we have a record. And Juan put in culture of optimization and Lucas's talk. What else?
So Nina Bayetti, who was the one who worked at ClassPass, her talk was about, was it really a winner? And the concept of her talk was how you should be measuring further into the funnel to make sure that just because your up funnel metric looked good, that it didn't necessarily negatively impact your business downstream. And so off the back of that, I think that we could potentially be putting more rigor in place around metric selection and making sure that the ones that we're picking for our test evaluation are robust enough, but also sensitive enough to our treatments, and how we focus on the one KPI for the t-test and then picking your others. But like, that's all well and good in practice, but like it always gets complicated. And so I would love to hear how people are tackling that and some ideas or frameworks that people use.
So you're thinking like KPI, metric impact, metric selection, downstream impacts. Yeah. Yep. Carrie, I think I had you on force mute, but I think I unmuted you if you want to try.
Okay.
There you go.
Thanks. Yeah, I would second Chad's getting feedback. Is that just me?
It's just you.
Anyway, I would second Chad's vote for Elsa's topic. I thought the qualitative and how to ask questions without kind of leading the witness. And she has some really good points. I'm gonna make all of our folks watch.
You know, it's how many of you use something like Vanguard Labs has a qualitative group that they can ask questions of, or a customer base, and then some people use something like usertesting.com, some kind of other thing. How many of you are actively engaged with teams who do that type of research or own that type of research? Okay, I'm asking how many. That's really stupid when all of you are on mute, but
use the voting buttons.
Use the voting buttons that nobody knows how to use because we've never used them. If you think, so from my perspective, it's not just like Elle's talk was very much so about like you're literally talking one-on-one, you're asking people questions and stuff like that. But I think we could use that. I'm thinking back on some of the work we've done recently, Valerie, where we had to write out the script for usertesting.com or something similar, and making sure that you're not leading the witness. I think that could be really helpful. Corey says, proper capture, super important, easy to get wrong. You want to capture email addresses. Do you increment on form submit, form acceptance, add to file, or all three? Yep.
So,
yeah.
Go ahead, Chad.
Oh, I was just going to say, I thought like for Joanna's presentation, I thought there was actually, so she focused very specifically on the concept of conversion copywriting and how you can extract these customer insights. I thought that was, obviously our team doesn't do a lot of conversion copywriting, we're internal experimentation at Microsoft, but the concepts were, to me, less about this one area and more about how you influence somebody from, and this sounds bad, but like from an emotional sort of
Sure.
visceral reaction perspective. So like I saw the potential for using that even in within product management. So if you're trying to move in a new direction for a particular feature, or if you're trying to get the team to invest in a particular area, then maybe you can do that using some of this customer facing language. So I like the broad applicability of what she was talking about. It interesting to think about where else that type of qualitative design could be implemented.
Absolutely. Testing, audience management, bookie.com seemed to run all the tests at the same time, avoiding test malaise. Yeah, that was really interesting to me. I mean, obviously they've got the traffic to do it, but the interesting thing, and I know, Chad, you and I have talked about this in the past, if you have enough traffic, you're doing that analysis in the first place. But what stood out to me was his point that if you're not testing simultaneously, then you are potentially missing interaction effects. So if you're using swim lanes, that may be a bad thing. If you're, or if you're testing, you're going to test this and you're going to test that, and they both win, and then you roll them both out, and actually they had an interaction effect. You guys can't see my fingers, and that was a negative thing. So it's actually maybe if you have the sophistication of your analysis people and tools, that maybe it's actually better, which really flies in the face. How many times have we said no concurrent testing? Yeah, that jumped out at me.
Like I'm a little confused where it must have started somewhere like in a blog, almost like folk knowledge, and then it just kind of got passed down. But I completely agree with what Lucas was saying, that there are definitely cases where if you're doing concurrent testing, you could have a bad result. But generally, even if there's interaction effects, when you test, you will know even if you don't know exactly where the interaction is, you know that there might be a negative interaction somewhere, and that's that safety parameter that I talked about before. Right. So if you have a really, really bad interaction, then you're going to see that negative effect. And you say, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to roll these out. So like at Microsoft, we can actually find those interactions. And so it's a little bit easier for us to splice in and figure things out specifically. But I think generally speaking, it's okay to run concurrent tests. I think it's a good thing, generally speaking. It's like, it's so weird because there's so many, like there's a lot of teams I've talked to that are like, yeah, we could be doing 5,000 tests a year, but we have to go sequentially, and so that cuts our velocity by like 90%. Why do that?
We have clients right now that are looking at their available traffic and calculating how many tests they could run based on the assumption that you need swim lanes. Maybe you don't, maybe you shouldn't. So I think, but you have to have a way to measure that. You have to have a way to measure the interaction effects. And I will say that not every tool and not every analyst has that skill set.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and it's something that you could, like if you have a statistician or if you have a data scientist or even an engineer with appropriate stats knowledge, or an analyst with appropriate stats knowledge, you can do these things offline as well. So you can just do like pairwise t-test from one experiment to another and see if they had an effect on each other. But yeah, like you said, there is some additional knowledge required.
There is, and there's no today out of box solution where I can push a button and say show me interaction effects, where I can import all of my test results that I ran simultaneously and say, hey, what interacts with what? Wouldn't that be great? Somebody go build that.
If you're doing all of that though, do you have to look for, are you looking for statistical significance for all of those interactions? Because if you are, you have to have a lot
of data.
I'm like, I don't know how to say this without profanity.
I know what word you were going for.
A whole lot of traffic.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Well, you either need to have a whole lot of traffic, or kind of like Lizzie said, your definition of significance, your threshold needs to change. So it's kind of like that's sort of the trade-off. Like if you're looking at the statistical measure behind your interaction effect and you don't see anything, well, it might be that there's an interaction effect that exists, but it's not practically significant to you. Right, so that's kind of the trade-off you have to make. It could definitely still be there,
Right.
but it just will be very small.
Right. Right. So just like if we're running a test with on low traffic, we have to find the biggest lever to pull to be able to see it, or find a way to increase the traffic. So those are our two options, right? So we either, I mean, other than lowering our statistical significance, if we want to stick it at wherever we're at, we're going to stick that landing, we got to get that. Either you need a big change or more traffic. All right, we got 4 minutes. We got tons of really good topic ideas over in the TLC calls channel.
Kelly, I think you need to address the voting on the drink.
Oh, okay. Let me just at least address the voting, and we can all blame Merritt Aho that you're not going to get an answer. But everybody
because not here today.
TLC Slack for several different names. The top two names were the Bayesian Donkey and Liquid Confidence. So we decided to run an A/B test during the happy hour at the TLC, where we put out boxes and we asked people when they were signing in to go get their drinks to which name they preferred. There were hilarity ensued as everybody began to lecture us about how this was not an A/B test for various different reasons. If you didn't get the email about it, it was very enjoyable. It was a lot of fun. And we had about 120-ish people that actually participated in, out of the 200 and something that were at the happy hour, about 120 participated. And then we ran out of tokens. We had more people than we expected. It was a great fun. But the result ended up being, I think one was like 4 votes more than the other. And I was all ready to, step up on a table and get everybody's attention and tell them which one won. And Merritt, meanwhile, pulls out a calculator and calculated the p-value. And I think it was p was like 0.76, and we did not reach statistical significance. So instead, we had to say neither one was better. And they're like, yeah, but which one won? I mean, I cannot tell you how many people said, yeah, but one of them got more votes. And I'm like, but statistically,
do you know who you sound like?
I did. I sounded a bit like Gershaw and Chad. But yeah, but it was Merritt. That was Merritt who told me that I could not say that we had a winner. So statistically, there was no winner. They were equally loved names. So fun times were had by all. And our next happy hour will be at the DA Hub. And hopefully we'll have another chance for another vote. Maybe on the same names, maybe on different. But thanks to everybody for participating. It was a lot of fun.
Merritt was just bitter because his name didn't win.
Didn't win? No, there was no winner.
For the voting, right? He wanted it.
It's true. We can say that.
So let me rain on the parade for 10 seconds.
Uh-huh.
So when you calculate significance, the whole idea, right, is that you have this larger population. And so you're doing an estimate of what is really happening with the bigger group. But if you're looking at 100% of the group, that's it. That's your winner.
Oh, that's a really good point. But the people that were at the happy hour were a representative sample of the larger TLC. Because there's 400 and actually almost 500 members of the TLC, and there were only 100 and something people at the happy hour that voted.
Sure.
Anyway, it was a lot of fun. Thank you guys for participating. Thanks for joining us today. Invites will be coming out soon for the next couple of months as I reach out. For those of you who submitted ideas over on the calls channel for topics, if you have panelist suggestions, send those to me. You can either private message me on the Slack, send me an email, or just put it in the TLC calls channel. I have some ideas already. I will tell you that hopefully May or June, we'll talk about product versus marketing, depending on Chad's availability. That's all. Thanks, everybody.